Okay. I want to welcome our valued members and our distinguished guests to the AFD second town hall meeting of the 2022 year. Very special opportunity this month. This will be the first time I will say we have done a town hall around an AFD benefit program, but we could not be more excited um, that the American Association of Franchisees and Dealers, as best we can tell, is the first national trade association to offer to our members a fairly new device that's allowed by current federal and state laws to offer pooled employer retirement plans to our members. And we are very excited to have been discovered by or introduced to uh, Access Retirement Solutions and Heath Miller, who is our guest speaker today, to partner with them to be able to offer what really is an extremely exciting potential employee benefit that our members are able to take advantage of. And so I'm about to introduce you to Heath Miller, who is one of the founders of Access Retirement Solutions and has built this program around us. And we're able to sponsor the program because of some exciting benefits that are available exclusively to AFD members by virtue of our branded partnership. And then Heath is also going to touch on the fact that is the pooled retirement plans were a creature that became law in the beginning of 2021, as I understand it, and Keith is going to be focused on that. But there are also new state mandates, and he's going to be talking to you about the new Secure Act that also touch on expanded retirement benefits that give us even new opportunities. And with that, without stealing your thunder, Heath, let me introduce Heath Miller to not to be confused with Keith Miller, who is the AFD Director of Public Affairs. And I constantly confuse Google when I go to call one or the other of you. It calls the opposite one. But Heath, please take it away and tell us all about how we can save for retirement.
Thanks, Bob. And I'm also not the former tight end for the Steelers, who was also a Heath Miller. So I can't tell you how completely excited we are about this partnership. The AAFD members are the only group that we work with that we actually extend a discount to. As Bob had mentioned, the law changed. It's actually at the end of 2019. It was the Secure Act, what is now kind of being referred to as Secure Act 1.0. It was snuck into the budget bill in 2019, but it had a delayed effective date. So it didn't go live until last year. And what it did is it created pooled employer plans. And what's unique about that is historically, unrelated businesses would have there was a number of impediments and at times practical, almost impossibilities that would preclude groups from aggregating together and getting any real buying power. So if you had 10 separate companies that were unrelated, they all kind of had to go it alone. And as a result, you had a whole bunch of redundant services that each one was paying individually, and they never really got the economies of scale that were possible. The history on that made some sense because historically you had defined benefit pension plans that were very common in the United States, and the employer had a long-term funding liability and obligation associated with those arrangements. That's really not the case with 401k plans. You may have an obligation to fund a match or a profit sharing contribution, but that's usually limited to the year, if even the full year, and that can always be changed prospectively. And Congress kind of finally woke up because they realized that 401k plans are the predominant retirement plan, and all the studies are showing that mere access to a 401k plan makes a significant change in the retirement savings that individuals have. I mean, I've seen studies where it's as crazy as people in their 50s having, $3,000 saved versus $100,000 saved. The average, the only distinction really being access to a 401k plan. But they weren't terribly inexpensive in the past. So if anybody has looked into implementing a 401k plan previously and concluded that it was too expensive, or it was too big of a headache, or all of those other issues, that's the beauty to the pooled employer plan structure, at least as we have implemented it. It takes away all of that, and that allows you to empower your employees to achieve their financial security. So today, I'm going to kind of talk about these four aspects, really, how, as we're seeing sort of the great reset or the great resignation or all the different buzzwords that are thrown around it, how a 401k plan can be used to attract and retain employees and how it's actually valued, even more so than people may realize. I'm going to talk about PEP specifically and the tax credits that are available. So if you don't have a 401k plan, because the way we've structured it, the way the tax credits work, in many instances, it can in essence be free. I'm going to talk about these state mandated IRA programs that may apply to you now, and many people aren't even aware of it. The exception or the exemption that you get from having to deal with that headache is the existence or the sponsorship participation in a 401k plan. So adopting a PEP can get you out of a state mandated nightmare that you may not be aware of. And then really just the new structure in general, how it can mean less work, less liability. We like to say we're in essence the Netflix of 401k plans, because for once you can kind of outsource all the responsibility and have a great benefit that rivals what would be offered to a Fortune 100 company, even if you're a small organization with 3 or 4 or 5 employees. So with that, I'm going to dig in and address kind of each of these. So as I hinted, the employee attitudes towards retirement benefits, bounced ahead, may not be what a lot of people actually would think intuitively. But 78% are saying that retirement security has become more important in the last 2 years. That was as low as 52% just about a decade ago. 75%, 3 out of 4 new hires at employers with 401ks cite the retirement plan as a compelling reason to stay there. 59% of workers who would switch employers for a nearly identical position if they offered a 401k plan. And then 4 out of 5 prefer a strong benefit package over a pay increase. And among the younger, kind of the millennial 18 to 34, it's as high as 90%. So this is something that's very much valued by individuals, more so than employers may otherwise believe or understand. And I'd mentioned the state mandated IRA programs. So this is state by state. Each one is different. Each state has different thresholds. There are penalties involved in some of these that are quite extreme and can be shocking. So if you do not currently offer a 401k plan and you have a number of employees above the threshold that has been implemented, and there are many doing phased implementation over time, you can be subject to extreme penalties if you do not participate in a state mandated IRA program that requires you to withhold from the employee's paycheck and distribute or contribute that money into one of these state mandated IRA arrangements. And I can give you a couple of interesting war stories that will scare the pants out of you. And this literally happened this week. We got a call from a group in California that had a handful of W-2 employees, but it was a staff leasing organization. And they had nearly 2,000 W-2 employees that they would lease out to other businesses. That was the nature of their arrangement. They assumed this didn't apply to them. And with the pandemic, as you can imagine, if you haven't heard, employers were struggling with a lot of things like vaccine mandates and lockdowns and a whole host of other issues. This went completely unnoticed to this group. And they got a letter from the state of California indicating that they were subject to an enormous penalty. And to give you an idea how bad those penalties can become, it's $250 per eligible employee if you don't have a plan or don't begin participating in that state mandated IRA after 90 days, and an additional 500 months if it takes you another 6 months to get plugged in, for a total of $750. Now, when you have 2,000 W-2 employees that you've been leasing out and you find out that you may be subject to a penalty that could be as much as $750 a piece, I can tell you that becomes a wake-up call very, very quickly. And this wasn't a group that was doing anything wrong, unethical, immoral. They were just unaware that this had been implemented. And there's many states where this comes into play. So it's happening in Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois. A number are active. Some have already been passed and they're phasing it in. To give you an idea, if you happen to live in Oregon, as you can see, their first wave addressed employers with 100 or more employees back in late 2017, and then it dropped to 50 to 99, and 20 to 49, and 10 to 19. They're literally targeting at the end of this year to actually impact independent contractors even, anyone with fewer than 5 employees. And the way they're doing that is they're requiring you to register as a business. And then if you have a plan, you can simply click and show that you're exempt from those requirements. The exemption's huge, because so you can participate in the PEP that we've branded and co-partnered with the AFD on and avoid all of these state mandated programs. So instead of going to an arrangement that's going to be managed by the state, which doesn't exactly have the most illustrious track record of managing assets, that is equivalent to basically dealing with the DMV on your retirement. And if you happen to span or cross state lines, you could otherwise be subject to these rules in multiple jurisdictions. Instead, if you're in a PEP, you have all of the flexibility of 401k plan. Unlike traditional 401k plans, even all the providers are fiduciaries looking out for your best interests, access to investments that would otherwise not be available to you as an individual in many instances, low cost, and a whole host of perks. It's just that these state mandated IRAs, as you can see, started to come in well before the Secure Act was even passed. The Secure Act and the creation of PEPs is a far more elegant and efficient solution. So the states have taken the approach of the stick, and PEPs basically create the approach of a carrot, especially when you talk about the tax credits that are available that I'll get into in a moment. So under the structure that we have put into place, we were able to provide a series of simple low-cost 401k plans in the structure, and we serve as the sponsor of the PEP, we as an Access Fiduciary Services, and or Access plan sponsors of PEPs. Access Fiduciary Services manages the assets and selects the menu that is made available to you. There's also a brokerage window option if you'd want to go outside of the sort of menu that's actively monitored and selected based on objective, financial related standards. But this whole approach that we've taken, because we charge a subscription fee, allows us to be completely unconflicted. Our group and the providers that we select and are responsible for selecting for administration, record keeping, and trustee services, nobody gets a penny from the investments other than the participants. As a result, there is no incentive to self-deal on those funds, which often exists in other structures. And there is every disincentive to have an arrangement that's not optimal, because we're legally responsible to make sure it's fiduciarily prudent. So the investments are best in class, and we'll get into that in a bit and show you how it's done. And the provider's costs are then the responsibility of our organization, and we're legally responsible to make sure the services provided are necessary and that the fees are reasonable. If they're not, then we have exposure. As a result, you get a number of checks and balances, everybody stays in their lane, and it drives the costs way down because the economies of scale and because you have independent parties keeping an eye on one another to make sure it's all done correctly. So in the end, we sponsor the plan, we've developed the fiduciary governance, and we select and monitor both the providers and the investments. In that approach, you also do not get hamstrung under the pooled employer plan structure into a one-size-fits-all. In contrast, what we've done through our partners that work on the PEP, that have literally tens of thousands of other plans and history with that, we've identified really three main categories of plan structures that tend to meet the vast majority of the population. Within each of those buckets, if you will, or those options, there is flexibility. So it's sort of a semi-custom arrangement where you can design a plan that meets your needs. If you happen to have a situation that's very unusual and you need a specific customized arrangement, that's available as well. So as a result, the decision of one participating employer that joins into the PEP is not dictated or affected by the others. You can have a completely unique plan design for your population that meets your business needs, and it does not affect in one way or the other the design flexibility that any of the groups that have come before you or will come after you happen to select. Also under the Secure Act and the creation of these pooled employer plans, what is unusual is it mandates that different parties act in a fiduciary capacity. Most 401k plans, if they even have a financial advisor assisting, oftentimes have somebody that's not a fiduciary, meaning they're not necessarily even looking out for the best interests of the plan and the participants. Record keepers And the administrative service providers associated with most plans typically are also not fiduciaries. What most don't realize is the employer that sponsors that plan is usually the one that's on the hook for everything, even though they're engaging third parties to assist them. So in a traditional plan offering, all of these services, as you can see on this table, are provided by third parties, but they're merely providing a support role. They're not actually responsible if they make a mistake. The employer themselves would have been. In our PEP offering, because of the statute and because of the way we have structured it, everything changes. The third parties are the fiduciaries responsible. In essence, it's a full outsourcing arrangement. The one exception is, I don't know who your employees are if you don't tell me, and I can't go steal your money and put it into the plan. So you're responsible for ensuring that the census data regarding your workforce is both timely and accurately remitted, along with the plan contributions based upon the design that you've created. For all of this, you get transparency and at a better price. So the investment management services of selecting the menu of investments that's offered, the investment offerings themselves, administration, record keeping, trustee and custodial services. For most, an audit won't be required unless you happen to have, historically, if you had over 100 employees, basically you'd have been subject to an audit. In the PEP, the audit is done at the PEP level. So 1,000 companies with 1,000 employees apiece, each of which would have otherwise had an audit, now gets collapsed to a single audit when that arises. So you don't have to worry about 5,500s, you don't have to worry about plan audits at your level, and you don't have to worry about the legal and compliance. All of that is handled in the PEP structure just because it is a structured arrangement to provide efficiency and economies of scale to everybody. In that, because our fee is paid through a subscription-based fee charged directly to the employers, and because the record-keeping fee is done on a per-head basis and already negotiated, as well as the administrative costs, and the trustee, none of these parties, including ourselves, ever receive any money from the investment offerings. Again, we select investments based solely on excellence. And then within each strategy, once identified, we find the most efficient way to acquire that particular strategy, the most optimum share class, if you will. The uptake of that is the average cost of the investments all in is probably around 30 basis points. Now, depending on your investment strategy or your appetite, that can get low as a diversified portfolio of 2 to 4 basis points. Or if you don't know or don't care to deal with the complexity of investments, we have sort of a managed fund option, a target date series, and that will allow you to sort of set it and forget it. And those range from 30 to 40 basis points. I'll get into that here in a moment. So we have an index sleeve. So people are curious about what the investments themselves are. You'd be looking at Fidelity index funds from large cap, small cap, mid cap, bonds, international. On the far side, you'll see the gross expense ratio. You're looking at basically 2 to 4 basis points, and that's 0.02%, 0.02% annually. So next to nothing. To give you an idea, what that means relative to what you might find in the marketplace, we've seen some large plans where that same S&P 500 fund, because they're virtually all doing the same thing, could be as much as 16 basis points or 0.16% versus 0.02%. We've in fact seen that as expensive as 1.2%. So for example, we met with a doctors group with about 13 folks, had about $2.5 million. The cost savings under the PEP structure was approximately $35,000 in just the first year for that group. The economies of scale and the elimination of conflicts and provision of transparent pricing is a structural change that cannot be emphasized enough, and what that means for employers that want to adopt a plan but are wearing lots of hats and trying to run a business so they can get rid of those headaches and at the same time provide an incredible benefit to their employees so that they can have a reasonable chance of retiring. We also have a series of target date funds. I'd mentioned is sort of the set it and forget it managed structure. These change the risk profile as you age. So you basically pick the year that you anticipate retiring. You can see the cost structure there is, like I'd mentioned, around 30 to 40 basis points. The American funds are 6 share class. It's basically the cheapest share class. I'll show you in a moment what that can mean. One of the top rated target date series in the entire country. We select, as I mentioned, all the funds based on an objective investment policy statement that's very technical and goes through a number of quantitative and some qualitative aspects to ensure that each fund that is selected and offered to the participants is best in class. Again, talking about hidden fees that people may not understand. Oftentimes, even if you think your plan is free, it may not be, because oftentimes the administrative costs are actually subsidized through the funds in an opaque manner. So for example, American Funds, the 2030 target date retirement fund. There are a number of ways of acquiring that exact fund, same management, same underlying holdings. The difference is the cost. You'll see this column that says revenue sharing. This is how much may be shared with the record keepers or administrators in other structures. Those kickbacks, for lack of a better word, end up hiding what you're truly paying. As you can see, in some instances, that can be 1.1% in kickbacks. If you do the math, 1.45% expense ratio, as you can see down here in the R2 share class, minus 1.10 is 0.35. The share class that we use is 0.35 with no revenue sharing. That's because no money flows to these other third parties. Everything is done in an unconflicted manner to provide best in class and lowest cost to everybody. And then we also provide a whole series of actively managed funds that are available for those that want to dial in or work with a third party advisor to construct a portfolio based on their needs, because this allows us to provide a benefit to somebody, whether they're the CEO of their company or simply just a part-time employee that's trying to save some money. In addition to the investment aspect, the administrative and record-keeping costs that typically arise in a smaller plan, as you can imagine, tends to be a function of headcount. It really doesn't cost any more to record keep a plan if there's dozens of zeros in the account or just a couple. So in a small organization that may have 10 to 25 participants, it would not be uncommon to see the administrative and record keeping costs to be $150, if not north of $300 per employee. In contrast, an organization that's much larger has more buying power and more efficiency because they're amortizing some fixed costs over a larger population. This is in essence the concept of the pooled employer plan structure created by the Secure Act. It allows lots of organizations with as few as 10 or 5 or 20 employees to get the buying power of an organization that is much, much larger. As a result, you're looking at an aggregated per participant administrative or record keeping costs that's much closer to around $80 typically. Legal and compliance aspects that would otherwise fall on the shoulders of the employer that decides to adopt a 401k plan is no longer an issue. That's handled at the PEP level. So you can disregard concerns with routine amendments of the PEP, merger and acquisition activity. If you happen to be buying up other franchises or other locations, can be much more streamlined. Fiduciary litigation is probably not a huge issue for this group given the size, but no 5500s takes away a huge annual headache filing, and the need to even do quarterly meetings is gone because it's handled for you. And then finally, I had mentioned some of the tax credit opportunities. So for small employers that have fewer than 100 employees, under Secure Act 1.0 and Secure Act 2.0 that just passed the House. So I'll touch upon this, but I don't want to get into too much detail because you never know what the ultimate law is going to be, but I can give you some insights on what's coming. If you have fewer than 100 employees, you're eligible for a tax credit up to $5,000 a year for each of the next 3 years. And that's determined based upon the number of non-highly compensated employees you have. So anybody that owns less than 5% of your business and makes less than roughly $140,000 is deemed non-highly compensated. So for every one of those, you get a $250 tax credit. It's actually $500 for the first and then $250 for each one. So it's $500, $500, $750, $1,000. That's kind of how it counts up. For a total of $15,000 potentially if you have 20 or more employees over the next 3 years. In addition, there's a second tax credit, and this is additive, they're not mutually exclusive, if you're doing auto enrollment of $500 a year as well. What this basically means, ultimate takeaway, is if you don't have a plan and you implement one now, depending on your head count, you could have up to a $16,500 tax credit available to you over the next 3 years to implement a plan. And the reason that's so compelling is our fee for a group under 100, assuming it has less than $11 million in the plan, which is almost mathematical certainty given it's hard to get to that number if you have a small group and you don't have a plan currently, is going to cap out normally at $2,250, and we actually provide a discount to everybody. So you're looking at a discount even below that, because we normally charge $75 per participant, but we extend a discount to the AAFD members. So you're looking at a cost that oftentimes is far lower than the actual cost or the actual credit available from the US government. So just to give you an idea of some of the numbers, kind of what we've seen, and to explain this, with your tax credits, we looked at a group that had 20 employees. 19 of them were non-highly compensated. So you basically had an owner and 19 workers that all made under 140 grand. The tax credits for the first 3 years was going to be $5,250. That's $250 times 19. The total cost for the first year before the credit was going to be $2,750, which meant they actually had $2,500 of tax credit remaining. In years 2 and 3, it would be the cost would be $2,250 because there was a $500 startup fee. They'd have $3,000 remaining. 50 employees, you get a very similar outcome. 100 employees, you get a similar outcome. So never before was there really an opportunity where it's kind of a no-brainer. You can implement a plan that benefits you as the owner, your workers, in a number of ways, not only the ability to save for retirement, but also to attract and retain those workers, which is becoming more difficult, all while avoiding the impediments and entanglements of the state mandated IRA programs that you may either have to comply with or pay significant fines if you don't, that dramatically dwarf the cost of actually having the plan itself. So the full takeaway is the arrangement that we've been able to put together with the AFD is transparency at a better price, where you can, in essence, outsource everything to third-party fiduciaries and give your participants, employees, access to a benefit that rivals a Fortune 100 company while reducing your historic headaches associated with the plan, avoiding the headaches that are coming with the state mandated IRAs, and really be ahead of the curve. And that's pretty much where we stand right now with the pooled employer plans, the state mandated IRAs, and why it's never made more sense to seriously consider one of these arrangements. If I can answer any questions, Bob, if you want to open it up for any of the people that may have called in or watching, I'm happy to answer anything you want to throw at me.
Are there any questions in the chat, Rich?
There are not at the moment, Bob.
Okay. So we have a small group of folks here. Does anybody want to have any questions that they'd like to throw out to Heath?
And if there's anything you think I missed, Bob, by all means, throw me a zip. I'm happy to address everything.
So as a eminently qualified, ignorant person that's looking at it, am I correct in my summation that that through a pooled employer plan, small businesses are able to work through you and to aggregate their little business with other little businesses, and then to be treated with the kind of benefits and cost structure, because you're able to count all of those individuals. So by having a pooled employer plan, my 5-employee company might have 5,000 employees because of the way we're able to aggregate them together. Yeah,
that's why I want to jump back to this slide. This kind of illustrates it. So if you had historically, if you had a single company that had 1,000 employees, if they went out to try and negotiate the cost of the record keeping administrative services on that plan, because they had 1,000 folks, the fixed costs would be amortized over that 1,000 person population. So the third party that would be doing administration or record keeping would be willing to do this at a lower per head cost. In aggregate, it'd be higher because you got more head count, but the per participant cost would be lower. What the PEPs allow us to do is take 100 10-person organizations and use that buying power to extend the per head cost that would, in many instances, be 5-fold higher for them individually, and extend that to them. So for example, our record keeping cost under the PEP has been negotiated around $50 per head. The administrative cost, we were able to negotiate ranging from 36 down to 16. And the reason I say that is there's breakpoints. As the head count goes up in the PEP, everybody, not the ones last to join, not the ones who were first to join, but everybody in the PEP sees a reduction in their administrative costs, slowly arcing down from $36 to $16 per year per participant, which is charged typically to the participant's account. The employer can pay that if they want because they've got the tax credits. So they can take advantage of paying it outside of the plan, and rather than using a pre-tax structure to pay a deductible cost, they can pay it directly should they choose to. Totally up to them. But that gives you an idea how that buying power works for these smaller organizations that may have a limited amount of buying power. And in reality, the other impediment that tends to exist in these smaller organizations is if you've got 10 folks, you know, you've got people serving as HR, CFO, you know, they've got many different hats on trying to run that business. The last thing they need to do is try and navigate the waters in a historical 401k plan structure, which may be complex. This is, like I said, it's sort of the Netflix of 401k plans. You outsource it and you get access to, just as you would get access to the universe of movies on Netflix at a low cost. And it doesn't matter if you watch 1 or 100. You don't have return fees or rewind fees like you had back in the day at Blockbuster. It's a better solution. This is the same kind of thing. They get to outsource that, and all they have to do is get the money and the census data to us timely so that we know who works there and make sure that they're in compliance. The rest of it's all completely taken care of for them.
Heath, a question did come in on the chat. Question is, if we already have a 401k management company as we are a C Corp, what benefits might there be to move it to this program, if any? Yeah,
so if you have a plan, I almost know with certainty, I'm going to take a little bit of a flyer here because there's always the one-off, you know, 1 in a million. But generally speaking, when you sponsor your own plan, you probably don't realize it, but you're almost certainly the plan administrator. The group that's doing the administration for you is a third-party administrator. Rarely are they a fiduciary. In other words, if they make a mistake, it's actually your problem. But as a fiduciary for the plan, you have an affirmative duty under the law to look out for the best interests of the participants, which may actually include you yourself. In that regard, you have an affirmative duty to understand what services are being provided, whether they're necessary, and what they are. You need to make sure that they're reasonable because you're kind of the watchdog looking out for your employees and participants to make sure they're not getting gouged on opaque investment costs or hidden fees that you weren't aware of, and to make sure that those fees are reasonable in the marketplace. So what we do for anybody that has a plan, because ours is completely transparent, I can tell you to the penny what your plan is going to cost in our structure. We spend more time helping people figure out what they're actually paying currently in their own structure. If you send us a message, get a hold of us, we'll ask for some basic documentation and we can look and see what you're currently paying and tell you immediately what you're going to pay in our structure. And if it's a better deal where you're at, you should stay. I mean, this is not any sort of hard sale. If you manage to do great, good for you. It hasn't happened yet. We haven't found anybody that falls into that situation. But if you find that our approach is, as I've said, going to provide greater service at a better price with access to at least comparable and almost certainly better funds at a lower cost, it's kind of a no-brainer to move. And then in essence, what you do is you just transfer from the single employer structure that you're most likely into the pooled employer plan structure. And we can mirror your plan design. So if you have a match currently, you can still have a match. If you don't want to do a match, you don't have to. If you want to have a profit sharing, if you want to do a safe harbor, whatever that structure is, we can take the document, replicate it, and you'll have an identical structure. You'll go out to Alaris, which is the publicly traded national bank that serves as the record keeper and trustee, and that'll be the portal that your employees will access the provisions to trade their funds just like anything else. They've even got a mobile app. So your participant experience will be changed only basically on the URL that they'll plug in when they go to manage it. Other than that, everything should be pretty much identical from their perspective. and a lower liability, lower workload for the organization itself. I hope that answers the question.
Chris, if you have additional part of that, feel free to unmute and ask. While waiting, any other questions? The minimum number of employees is 5 participating, or 5 whether they participate or not?
No. So that's the beauty. Our fee is only imposed on the participants. So you can have, ironically, this organization we talked to that had the staff leasing of roughly 2,000 employees, there's a chance only 4 will participate. Because there's a lot of turnover, and they'll design their plan almost certainly with a 1-year waiting period before they come in. That's okay. So that plan from our perspective would have, let's say it has 4 employees. That's all right. Our fee to them, because they don't get the discount you get, would be a whopping $300, $75 per participant, up to 30, and then we flatline basically. The record keeping fee and the trustee fee and administrative fee is generally most employers choose to charge, not all, some take advantage of the credit, but many will charge that to the participants themselves. So that doesn't cost the employer, the organization, a nickel. We actually have single person individuals that are 1099s in our PEP currently. So you can do it if you have 1 employee. There is a $500 plan document fee, and there's a minimum $750 annual administrative fee that's set against the per participant admin fee. But again, oftentimes that is paid through the plan. The only reason I had mentioned 5 or fewer or 5 or more, so that's where some of the state mandated IRAs kick in. So you're gonna be subject to those rules if you don't have a plan. So it's truly a no-brainer if you're that size. We can handle 2, 3, 4 person organizations. That's not an issue. On a single person organization, like a 1099, or if somebody has a business and they just don't have any employees yet, we literally just launched a solo pooled employer plan specifically for that population. So if you asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you, hey, even a 1 person can come into this PEP. They still can. It's foolish. The solo PEP is a far better solution for a single person. So I know that's a lot of detail.
No, and I appreciate that, because I know in my previous company that I ran, I had a 401k program. I was the only participant. The other folks who were full-time didn't want to participate.
Right.
And honestly, it cost me probably about $2,500 a year just to have the program in play. There were quarterly fees and all that good stuff. So, for those listening to this is an excellent opportunity to reduce a lot of those fees that would be charged from other third-party administrators. And I'll say that from my own experience.
Yeah, we actually have like, physicians or professionals that are in their 50s that are now independent prior to the solo PEP even being created, that adopted our PEP because of the contributions that they can put into it, because of the investment offerings that are available and the low cost. And they realized that relative to the charges they were incurring in a prior employer's 401k plan through administrative fees and investment fees that were charged to their account, and the IRAs that they had and what the investment costs, access to that share class, et cetera, they realized very quickly that our arrangement, even with the plan document fee for a single person, was a better deal than what they could get in the marketplace. So we've had a fair number of those folks. That actually is what led us to the solo PEP. We hated the fact that a single person was getting hit with a $500 plan document fee. There's no way around that. It's necessary for most employers because of the effort that goes into helping them design their structure. But we can avoid that for the single person now. So we've got a much better solution. And we found employers too that in this day and age, their workforce is sometimes bifurcated. They may have 20 W-2 employees, but they may have another 50 1099s that provide a series of services to them. Those individuals that are 1099s can independently adopt into the solo PEP now without any implications to the employer. And the employer that's using those 1099s can pay all, none, or some of the subscription fee for them. But it's the same structure. They're going to have the same investments. They're going to have the same experience. It's just an interesting way to kind of create some cohesiveness among your workforce, even those that aren't truly your W-2 employees. And they're responsible for it. You don't pick anything up.
One other question, and I thought I read it.
Let me jump in.
No 55, Form
Rich,
5500s required.
Rich, I'm sorry,
No,
Rich.
that 5500 is handled by the PEP. So I mean, anybody that's ever had to deal with this, then they understand the power. You'd be amazed how many people we talk to. They're like, wait, say that again. I don't have to do a 5500 anymore. It's like, that's right. They're like, sign me up. You know what I mean? That's the beauty to the PEP. You know, historically you could have had 1,000 companies with 10 employees. They were doing 1,000 5500s because each one of them was responsible for that. And that's taken off their plate, frees them up to focus on their core business, which is, you know, we live in a competitive environment. The last thing you need to do is have another distraction. This takes all that away.
Absolutely. Sorry, Bob. I know you're trying to speak.
Well, I'm trying to jump in because our homeowners association decided to have a power mower go by my window every couple of minutes, and I wanted to jump in with my question so I can mute it when I hear this loud noise coming in. But Heath, I did want you to kind of touch on you've mentioned that there are AFD discounts that we've negotiated with you, and also we're very transparent with the rebates or the non-dues revenue that you share back with us, because we share those amounts with our chapters. So if you are a member of the chapter, not only will you get an upfront discount off of Heath's normal pricing, but your chapter will also earn non-dues revenue, much like your franchisor does but they keep them and we share ours. So can you, if you recall, can you kind of share what those are?
Yeah. So the nice thing to keep in mind, so the fee that Access charges, again, would normally be for all intents and purposes, $75 per participant up to 30. And that would be capped then at $22.50. As again, I mentioned there's an asset-based fee, but it doesn't kick in until your particular group has $11 million. And by group, I mean that employer. So for all intents and purposes, our normal fee for anybody on the phone would have been no more than $22.50 and had been $75 per participant, not per employee. It's only people that actually come in. We extended a 20% discount off of that cost, 10% of which goes to help support the chapters, and 10% is saved by the participating employer. So instead of 75, they'd be looking at, what is that, 67.50 is what would be charged per participant to the actual employee. So none of that comes out of the plan. It's not coming out of the investments. Everything is still identical in that regard, no entanglements. We just simply reduce the fee that we charge, the subscription fee, to access the structure, because we saw this as a perfect fit for both our organization and the AAFD. And to be perfectly honest, it's consistent with the whole reason the Secure Act was passed. They looked out, and this is a little bit stale data now, but there was over 500,000 companies, small businesses in the United States with fewer than 100 employees that did not offer a 401k plan. And that was typically because it was just too burdensome, too costly, or both. And that's actually why we named the company what we did. We wanted to give access to the world. So Access Retirement Solutions is designed for that sole purpose, to address that segment of the marketplace that has been underserved or unserved completely. Ironically, in structuring it correctly and getting rid of the conflicts, we're the only, to my knowledge, unconflicted pool employer plan structure in the country. When you do things right, you get rid of the conflicts, and everybody stays in their lane, sticks to their knitting, and you don't have any backroom deals, the price comes down. And we've actually found that we are a brilliant fit, not just for the small and mid-sized, but even some much larger organizations, but for different reasons. They have different pain points. We get rid of their fiduciary liability. So the big companies are interested in us. They don't have to do an audit. So if you have over 100 employees, that audit cost can cost them 10 or 20 grand a year. They get rid of that. So there's a whole host of advantages. Just depends on where on the continuum from a employer size you happen to fall.
Heath, you had also mentioned that you were going to kind of gaze a little bit into your hazy crystal ball of what may come down with the Secure Act 2.0.
Yeah, so last week, the Secure Act 2.0 passed the House almost universally, which, as divided as this country is right now, to say that is a strong statement. I think there was 5 nays out of the House, like 500, whatever the rest is. One of the things they're looking to do is potentially adjust the tax credits. It kind of doesn't matter in our situation. It's technically, as I mentioned, $250 per non-highly, up to 50% of the cost, but usually most accountants would see the the effort expended by your HR person to deal with the payroll and remit that money, that's easily going to justify the other portion of the tax credit. But they're looking at changing that to 100%, not just 50%. So that makes that a complete no-brainer. They're also looking to mandate auto enrollment. And the way that works is if employees default in once they're eligible, rather than having to affirmatively opt in. And this surprised me when I first started practicing, which I didn't mention. I'm a tax employee benefits attorney and did this for years. I have an advanced law degree in this space. That's kind of how we were able to design this. I at one point in time rewrote all the retirement plans for American Airlines. I rewrote the 401k plan for Goldman Sachs, and it's just kind of what I did. But the auto enrollment portion, when they first implemented that years ago, and it's voluntary, I just assumed people would opt out. The studies have shown that's not the case. It's like 90+% of people that default into a plan stay in the plan. And they're looking at setting that default at 3% of the individual's compensation. So if they make $1,000 a month, they're going to put in like $30. Because it goes in on a pre-tax basis, people don't notice it, to be honest. And the way to get to retirement, you don't earn your way through retirement, you save your way to retirement, and the earnings are a nice kicker. So what they have found is by implementing that and auto enrolling people through a structure like this, you're going to enhance the savings. I want to point out that does not mean that the employer has an obligation to contribute on its behalf. This would just be the employee's money going in, and they can get out of it. But one of the things they're looking to do is to mandate all 401k plans have an auto enrollment feature. That's a pretty big change. There's some other subtle changes that they're looking to do. Interestingly enough, the auto enrollment facets or whatever else comes down, because the Senate has a competing bill. So we'll have to see how they shake out when they come together. The tea leaves are saying that this is going to get passed in some shape or form. Interestingly enough, if you already have a plan, or if you're a smaller organization, there's some delays in the effective date of implementing auto enrollment. So if you want to avoid having to ever worry about a state mandated IRA, whether you're in a state that has one now, has one that's being implemented, or is talking about putting one in, or you don't want to have to deal with some of these other facets, it really makes a lot of sense to get ahead of the curve, because you can be grandfathered in for a period of time and you can take advantage of the tax credits now and avoid the whole state mandated IRAs, and enhance the chances of retaining or attracting new workers to your group. It's a differentiator. So, do you have any more questions, Bob, or is the
no? But I think I'm done with questions. I don't know if there are any more questions from any folks that are on the call. I do want to let folks know that Heath is going to be present with us at our 30th anniversary conference, which is coming up in about 3 weeks' time, and they're going to have as a branded partner, they're going to have a lounge area where they're going to be able to talk to you and answer other questions. And I would encourage all of our chapters to make sure their chapter delegates spend some time with Heath. Rich, you have anything else?
No other questions in the chat or from me.
So Heath, this has been an extremely enlightening information. I'm sorry we don't have more folks on the call with us, but we have recorded it, and we're going to be posting this town hall on AAFD TV YouTube channel. If you want to go search this on YouTube, just go to YouTube and type in AAFD TV, and this is going to be there anywhere. I see a question coming in.
Yeah, one question. Are the $75 costs cited per month or year?
No, that's per year. So, and again, you guys get a discount below that. So I usually say it breaks down, we bill it quarterly. So you'd be looking at $75 billed at what's that break out to? Half of 37.5, about $18.75 a quarter, I think is what it is on any participant that's in the plan. That first quarter tends to be in arrears because I don't know who's going to be in your plan until after the end of the quarter. Yours is 10% less than that amount. But we do charge that to the employer. And part of the reason we do that is, one, you don't get a tax credit if you didn't spend anything. And the credits are not deductions, they're credits. So they actually offset dollar for dollar, in essence, shifting the cost to the federal government. And the other thing is we found that especially in the small business space, usually the guy whose name is on the door or the guy that owns it has the largest balance. And if he's not paying it directly, he's paying it indirectly through his own retirement account, and he doesn't even get a deduction in that setting. So it's a far more tax efficient, better way to approach it. And I would add, if anybody has a plan and they want to just benchmark it, let us know. We'll look at what they've got and show them what it would cost under our structure. If you don't know what you're currently paying, it's probably too much. And it makes you wonder why it's structured that way. We fully believe in sunlight being the best antiseptic. So we go in and we'll show you exactly what we're paying. We'll look at yours. And if you don't have a plan, you want to kick it around, you just want to know what it costs, give us a shout. We'll tell you what it'll cost.
And Heath,
pretty
if they
easy.
have questions or want their current plan reviewed, reach out to you or to Michael or?
Both, either or.
Okay.
Either or. Yeah, actually, I should have updated this slide. My poor colleague will now get more calls than I will. I guess maybe it was smarter than I thought. We usually have both of our names on this last slide.
I assume it's H. Miller at
Yep.
Access Retirement Solutions.
Yep.
There you go.
Well, this has been, for me, very enlightening, and hopefully for our other attendees as well. And I want to thank you guys for attending our second town hall for 2022, and hope to see a whole bunch of you, of our members and delegates at our upcoming annual conference. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you.